I got a teaching certificate in 1972, but in 72, as a social studies teacher, because I loved sociology and I loved history, but as a social studies teacher in the 70s, you kind of had to be a basketball coach or a football coach or a tennis coach, and none of those things. So I couldn't find a teaching job. So I did other odd jobs, and then I ended up getting a job on the Lummi Reservation teaching to kids who had been kicked out of school. And so I taught English and social studies, and another guy named Joe taught math and science. And we did it in one little building. We actually had to tile the building and plumb it first on the reservation because it was an old building. But it was a great year because we had these kids who'd been kicked out, the girls mostly because they were pregnant, and the guys mostly because they had been herring fishing with their families as they did, and so they would miss school and get kicked out for non-attendance. So that was my first year of teaching, and I loved it. Because I'm non-Indian, the tribal council really wanted native teachers, and so we didn't get rehired. But I came to Seattle, and I got a job teaching at a school called Indian Heritage High School, American Indian Heritage High School. We had 120 kids of 50 different nations, and I was there for almost 10 years. That job, we formed a community, really. The kids and the teachers and I, we were very, it's a small group, and those kids they were either kids who came because they wanted cultural training, like we were talking earlier about, being in the culture. So we had classes in bustle making and bead making and dancing and singing, and then we also had standard curriculum. So we graduated a lot of kids, and we were a community, and I'm still in touch with a lot of those kids who are in their mostly 60s. And some are grandparents and great-grandparents, and they still will reflect back and say, we were a community, and that's why I stayed in school. So I started teaching there, and then I ended up teaching all kinds of things. I taught at Franklin High School for 5 years. I taught at community colleges for 7 years, off and on. And my last job was teaching teachers as a senior lecturer at the University of Washington. So I ran a program called the Puget Sound Writing Project. And we had teachers, K-12 teachers, who'd come for a summer, and we'd make them write, and half the people would say, "Ooh, you're going to make me write," and other people say, "Oh no, I hate to write." But the whole idea was, when they went back to their classes, they loved writing, and so they could get kids to love writing. So that's about a 30-year career at about a bunch of different jobs. I teach once a month, like I'll teach this Saturday in Seattle. It's a group called Omoy Day, which means memory, and I've been doing that for 10 years. And they're people who were incarcerated in camps, most of them, or the children of people who were incarcerated in camps, and I'm getting them to write their memoirs. And we're putting together, before I got there, they put together 5 little books of stories, and we're putting together a 6th book of stories of being in camp and growing up in Seattle and just all kinds of stuff. Before I did that, I taught at Highline Community College, and we taught World War II story. I taught groups of people who had been in World War II, but they were like 15 people who had either been on ships or in the war or at home. And so those people, that group, they'd write stories and then read them. There was a rule. You couldn't just tell a story, you had to write it, which frustrated people because they'd start to tell a story. I said, no, you have to write it down. And so in that group, like we had one gentleman who had been on a ship that was kamikazed, and he was in the Pacific Ocean. And he said, he wrote this story. We said, "Wow, Bill, that's really something." He said, "Oh, it happened to everybody." No, it didn't. Or we'd have a woman who, grew a victory garden, and then some of the, it was mostly a male-female thing, but not always. The guys would say, "I didn't know you worked that hard." And so we put together 60 stories in this book called Missing Pieces. And then we put that in every library in Washington State. There's one woman who lived in Hiroshima, and she had left her town and her house for that day to do some shopping or get some vegetables or something. So she was gone when the bomb was dropped, but it was dropped on her household and her family. It was so horrific, it's just hard even for her to talk about it. But it became her home later. I suspect it was actually at least maybe even a couple years before she went back. So one thing I learned from this group of people, because most of the folks who were in camps are in their 80s and 90s, and they're vital, viable, excited, happy people who love life. And I have asked a few times, I said, how can you forgive people? And they said, well, what is our choice? What is my choice? I could be angry for the rest of my life, or I could say gambate, which is, so be it. It's happened. Let's move on. So I've learned a lot from them. And they sometimes call me sensei, which means it's honored teacher, honored one. And I'm like 20 years younger than a lot of people, but I take that as a great gift if they call me sensei. I think I really appreciated Roslyn because I was born in Issaquah, and I grew up in the Bellevue, Redmond, Issaquah area. And so when I was a little girl, not even a little girl, once I had a driver's license, I'd like take my grandma to Redmond, to the main street, to go to the hairdresser. And then we go next door to the butcher shop. Or we go to Bellevue and get a watch fixed in Bellevue. And so they were really great historic districts back then. And over the last few decades, you can barely see them. I mean, the historic district is there, but you cannot see it because it's so buried in, development. I came to Roslyn, I went, wow, this whole town, this whole footprint is a historic district, thanks to Florence Lentz, who, she applied for a historical category on here. So I said, what can I do to not see this turn into Bellevue or Redmond or Issaquah? Nothing against those communities, they're great communities, they've got good people, but they're not historic anymore, and this can be. So that inspired me, because I had a document, and I had people who cared, and I had people who trained me, and I thought I could make a difference. And then Mike Woodwell and Andy Yanushevitz and a number of people at the time I got involved were writing the guidelines. So the city now relies on these historic guidelines. They're like pictures of old buildings, and this is how the roof should be, and this is how the garage should be placed. And luckily, our comprehensive plan includes that document that group of people wrote, 15 years ago. I just really respect it and love it. And, there are people who will go to bat for this town and for what it stands for. This place has a character and a personality. It's just, it's like some books will really use place as a character in how they're developing the story. And I think there's been a few books centered in Roslyn, and they use Roslyn as a place, it's almost a person, you know what I mean? It's like, it's got character, it's got personality, it's got history, it's got flaws, just like people do, just like history does, yeah. But it's living history. Like right across from us is the Catholic Church of the Immaculate Conception, and that church was damaged in the Nisqually quake. It was closed for like 2 years while people raised money I think it was $200,000 plus, to put buttresses on it so it doesn't collapse again. In some communities, people would have said, oh, that's an old church, let's get rid of it. This church has a huge following, people who love it, and come every Sunday. Our streets are full of cars of parishioners. So it's kind of a symbol of the town in some ways, just because it's historic, it's got character, it's got people who love it. Roslyn's historic, it's got character, it has people who love it. Well, I've published the Missing Pieces Memoirs of World War II was a collection, and I edited it, and my name's on it, but I don't have any stories in it. But some years back, a friend and I, Judith, taught journal writing classes to teachers. It'd be a 10-hour class. We'd go to a school district and teach people how to use journals in the classroom, which is basically getting kids to practice writing in different ways. And over a period of years, students in the class who were also teachers say, is there a book about this? Is there a book about this? We go, no. So after a while, she and I said, we should write a book about this. So we wrote a book, she and I, called Journals in the Classroom, A Complete Guide for the Elementary Teacher. And it was in print for 25 years. So it's a little book. It's out of print now. In the first year, we got royalties for that book. It got published out of a place in Canada called Pegwas Publishing. So the first year we got our first royalty checks, and we each got $1,000. And this is like 30 years ago almost. But wow, we're writers. And the next year we probably, I think, got $800. And over the course of the 25 years, we got a royalty check every year. The last check was for 84 cents. So then it's time to stop. So we wrote that book. I've written 2 manuscripts that I have out at different agents looking at them. I've got some, 2 400-page manuscripts about historical fiction. I write every day, pretty much, write something, try and write something. I love taking pictures of kind of odd objects, like maybe a leaf in silhouette, or I've got a picture I took of, it's madrona bark. It's just like a picture of madrona, but it looks like a seascape. And so everybody argues with me and said, that's a seascape. I said, no, it's a madrona bark. The madrona tree, which has got really red, orange bark. And so I just saw, I was at a friend's house, I saw this tree. I thought, boy, that bark, part of it's dark and part of it's light. And took a picture and turned it sideways so it looks like driftwood on the beach, and then rocks, and then a sunset. Oh, my dad had a dark room, so I think he was very protective of his, so I didn't really get to use his, but it made me want to do a dark room, and so I took a bunch of pictures. He gave me a camera once, an old Nikon, I think it was. So I just really liked that process of seeing things develop at that point, the black and white in a dark room, and now I like playing with pixels. On a digital frame. Like, if I change this color of this tiny pixel, how does that change the format? It's kind of like art. It is art. Oh, just Photoshop, really, Adobe Photoshop, and I've got Lightroom, but I haven't really used it much. As I was on the Planning and Historic Preservation Commission, and we had presented we thought a really solid package to the council about just changing actually the footprint of houses, and we did a lot of work on that, and but the council at the time voted it down 100%. And I remember sitting there, and it was in a situation where it was a public hearing, and so we could present our argument and then we couldn't speak. And I listened to the council discussing what we had presented and arguing in an argument that we couldn't participate in, and I said, I'm going to have a voice. I'm going to sit on that council. And so 2 years later I did. And I had a pretty interesting campaign. I won by 1 vote, and I still have people 2 years later saying, Janine, I was that 1 vote. I just say thank you, because it's true. It's true. Anybody's 1 vote is the 1 vote. And it required a hand recount of the vote because it was so close. So I'm very happy that happened. I've learned to be grateful for every day, so I try and take a few minutes at night before I go to bed, and I just stand next to my bed and I go, I am grateful for my friends, I'm grateful for today, I'm grateful for the weather, and just whatever comes to mind, and that always makes me sleep better. I have friends who write grateful journals, and they'll write, they write pages about what they're grateful for, or at least every day write something, and I started doing that one time. I thought, no, that's not me. But I think it's just at that moment at nighttime when you just it's all quiet and the house is kind of asleep. I think I just want to remember I'm grateful for having good health, and for people who love me, and for living where I live. Whatever comes to mind, it's something different every night. It's just a minute. I think it just takes a minute.